Hi there, welcome back to See Today Business Now. Australia's foreign direct investment in Indonesia surged to over $542 million in 2023, ranking Australia as the 10th largest investor to Indonesia last year. Indonesia's Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs announced that Australia's total foreign direct investment, or FDI, in Indonesia reached $542.2 million in 2023. Australia's FDI to Indonesia grew by 4%, with investment projects increasing by over 200%. Now, the ministry has also noted the importance of Australia as a partner, as the country is the 10th largest investor to Indonesia out of 168 countries. Australia and Indonesia have many key trade and business agreements in place, including the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or IA CEPA. Inked in 2020, the agreement aims to boost economic and business ties between the two countries by, for example, eliminating all tariffs on Indonesian imports into Australia, and also through skills exchange programs and jointly funded trade and investment programs. However, there's still room to grow, as earlier this year, the Australian government appointed 10 business champions to enhance commercial links between Australia and 10 ASEAN economies, including Indonesia. Professor Jennifer Westacott is Australia's business champion for Indonesia. She was formerly the chief executive of the Business Council of Australia from 2011 to 2023 and is currently in Jakarta with 18 Australian digital tech leaders for the inaugural Australia Southeast Asia Business Exchange Program, or ACPX, and also to meet with many Indonesian officials and business leaders as well. All right, so let's get into this topic: ASEAN, Australian, and Indonesia-Australia business bonds and economic ties, with Australia's business champion to Indonesia herself, Professor Jennifer Westacott. Hi there, Professor. Thank you so much for coming to our studios.
Thanks very much.
Right, so as I was speaking there was quite a large increase in the foreign direct investment, but there is still room to grow. Now, as I mentioned, the Australian government has appointed business champions. One of them is to Indonesia, which is you. So maybe just explain to us first, what is the role of the business champion and how can it help business and economic ties grow?
Well, it's got a number of roles. The first is to raise awareness. So one of my jobs is to really make sure that Australian companies understand the opportunity here in Indonesia and that Indonesian companies understand the opportunity in Australia. So driving that awareness. The second is to drive focus in key sectors, to make sure that we're really doubling down on looking at some of the sectors like agribusiness, like healthcare, like resources, like clean energy, like education, and also to start driving deals between Australian businesses and Indonesian businesses, putting those deals together with the great team we have here at the Embassy. We've got these new deal teams that are designed to bring these deals to fruition, so that we start to actually really amplify the amount of two-way trade between the two countries, but particularly focused on getting more investment here from Australian companies into Indonesia.
Right. As you mentioned, they're driving deals. That's a key part of it. You are here in Jakarta, if I'm not wrong, to meet with government and also business leaders and officials as well. Could you maybe detail more about your visit and meetings here, and any specific projects or business investment ties that you're currently working to boost in Indonesia from Australia?
Yeah, look, I've had a range of meetings this week with Kaden, the equivalent of the Business Council, who I signed a memorandum of understanding with back at the B20 when it was in Bali a few years ago, with Indonesian business leaders, with key ministers. And the message over and over again is the opportunity in these key sectors where Australia has great advantages, where Indonesia has big demand, and putting those together. So if we go through those, clearly in resources, you have got a very ambitious plan for electric vehicles. We have a lot of lithium. What can we do together to get our lithium here to Indonesia, potentially then moving into refining and processing? We have very big companies in Australia with very big deposits, so what are the opportunities there? Agribusiness, obviously your President-elect has a very ambitious program around nutrition. We have a very, very mature food sector, particularly in dairy, particularly in protein, sugar, other key commodities that are needed here. What can we do together to bring those here and basically amplify what is needed here for food security and food self-sufficiency? Then there's things like the clean energy requirements as you move to renewable energies, as we accelerate that, things like transmission, things like hydrogen, things like carbon capture storage. Then there's education. I'm the Chancellor of one of the universities that's investing in Surabaya, setting up quite a large campus there, focused on ICT, business, and then looking at things like nursing, engineering. And education is a big opportunity, both for Australian universities and vocational colleges coming here, but also to make sure that Indonesia has the workforce to capitalise on these new sectors. And then there's an opportunities in healthcare, where obviously you're getting, as people have more disposable income, people looking at complementary medicines. So there's an array of opportunities, and then the mission that's here this week is around digital and ICT. The digital transformation of Indonesia will be worth $1 trillion US. There's huge opportunities for Australian companies who are developing new ICT tools and methodologies to come to Indonesia. But the thing I'm emphasising really strongly is we want to partner with Indonesian companies. We want to be here as an investor, but mostly as a partner, making sure that it's a win-win for both countries in all of those sectors.
Could you maybe speak into more detail any of the deals or the projects between companies in these sectors, particularly maybe agriculture, as you mentioned, our president-elect is focusing on that?
Well, we already have a lot of companies here investing in exporting to Indonesia, things in cherries, a lot of commodities already here. But the projects that we want to get up are things like looking at, how complex would setting up a dairy industry be here? We obviously have a huge live cattle trade into Indonesia. Are there opportunities to enhance that? But then there are, things that are kind of, emerging needs. Things like protein, things like protein-based plant substitutes, things like horticulture, where Australia has a lot of expertise. So we're looking at projects there. In healthcare, you've got Sensusa Medica working with a JV with Aspen, a big Australian company, and that is about setting up health clinics. That project is happening now, and Aspen is looking at investing sort of up to $1 billion in expanding hospitals and clinics. You've got TEAS here, the big resources company with about 5,000 employers, and also doing some really innovative things in respect of women in the construction and industrial sector. And then you've got 3 universities here. You've got Monash, that's been in Jakarta for a long period of time, Deakin, and then my university in Surabaya, all looking to kind of expand their operations and really make sure that we are helping build the workforce of the future, but making sure that we give people an opportunity to study in Australia, study in Indonesia, have exchanges between the two countries, work in Australian companies, work in Indonesian companies, so we build the skill base that's going to be needed for the huge transformation of your economy.
Okay, so of course, as you have been talking about, there's a huge potential and a lot of room for cooperation, but there's room to grow, right? And in the Australia Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040, it details plans to boost those trade ties with ASEAN countries, including Indonesia, but also notes the blockages to boosting such ties. Maybe could you speak on that?
Sure.
What blockages are hampering, this potential to go even further between Australia and Indonesia?
Yeah, look, I think one is just, perception and a lack of awareness of how to do business in Indonesia. So one of my jobs will be to get back to Australia, make sure people really understand how to do business, how they work with Indonesian authorities, the role of our deal team here on the ground with the embassy. I think another one, and this is both countries, is the whole issue of permitting and licensing. Can we make that simpler? Can we make it more predictable? And most importantly, can we make it faster? Because we're all in a race for capital around the world. We're all in that global race for that next big investment. And so if something takes 2 or 3 years to get an approval, that investment, has usually moved on. And then, say, if I take the education sector where there are enormous opportunities, mutual recognition of qualifications. We need to make sure that a business qualification has the same value in Australia as it does in Indonesia, so that we can get that exchange between the two countries. Because what we want to see is Australian universities and the vocational sector offering this kind of interoperability, if you will, between the two countries. Now, you can't do that if a qualification does not mean the same thing in Indonesia as it does in Australia. So there's some examples, but I do think the first one is the most important, which is perception and making sure that we've got the infrastructure on the ground to help Australian companies come in, do deals, partner with Indonesian companies and expand their level of investment.
All right, as you mentioned, the perception and maybe even communication.
Absolutely.
Not only from Australia to Indonesia, but maybe to Indonesia to Australia.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there are huge opportunities for Indonesian companies to invest in Australia, and we really want to make sure that the message is two-way. Okay. We both want to kind of complement each other's economic growth. So we've got to make sure in Australia that we make it easy for Indonesian companies to come to Australia, that we can sort of escort or concierge, if you will, people through the system, because we also have issues with planning and permitting. I don't think there's a country in the world that I visited that doesn't have issues with licensing and permitting. Okay. But, you know, we've got to kind of make sure that it's easy for Indonesian companies to do business in Australia.
And we're going to talk more about how maybe Indonesian businesses can go through you to, you know, make it easier for to connect their business to Australia. We're going to take a very short break, but we're going to continue our dialogue very shortly. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned to See Today Business. All right, welcome back to See Today Business. We are still joined by Australia's business champion to Indonesia, Professor Jennifer Westacott, to talk about ways that Indonesian businesses can link further and export to Australia as well, and maybe Australia to Indonesia as well. So, as we were mentioning in the previous segment, you know, one of the issues is the perception, maybe communication. How can we get there? How can Australian business get here? Let's talk about SMEs, the Indonesian small to medium-sized enterprises. You know, how can they maybe connect with you or communicate with you so that they can export their goods to Australia?
Yeah, look, it's a great question because your economy is driven very much by the SME sector. I think it accounts for sort of around 90% of all employment is in the SME sector. So we have to make sure that this is a story about the whole economy, not just the large corporates. So one thing I want to do when I come back in here in September is run a forum for SMEs where we can talk about the opportunities in Australia, we can talk about the opportunities here in Indonesia, and of course, you know, starting to think about on the ground how we marry people up, and crucially working with industry associations, Cardin, other bodies that I'm starting to meet who have those contacts day to day with those SMEs, making sure that we can put people in touch with one another. I mean, one of the things that I'm really keen to do is kind of like an ongoing prospectus where we can show people opportunities, we can show people in Australia, we can show people in Indonesia, and they can say, well, actually, I'm really interested in that. We've almost got to develop a kind of deal book, if you will, that people can say, well, I'm really interested in getting involved in that. And then I think one of the jobs on the ground of our collective agencies here in Jakarta and here and across Indonesia and in Australia is starting to marry people up. And starting to marry either SMEs with SMEs or SMEs with large businesses who are going to make sure that we put those SMEs in the big supply chains.
This is exciting. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe that system has not been put up yet where SMEs can have that kind of someone to help them communicate with.
Well, you've got pretty mature business organisations here, and we have in Australia as well. So one of the things that I'll be doing is working through, say, our Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, that's the kind of peak body for SMEs in Australia, and then the peak bodies here, starting to kind of get people together. But the really important thing we need to do is start to drive business-to-business relationships, because this is a contact sport, if you will. You know, people need to know each other, they need to build trust with one another. But a first mover opportunity with the SME sector is going to be to link them to large corporates either here or in Australia to make sure that they can be part of those big supply chains, because that's where the big opportunities are.
Okay, we'll continue to update with you that as the forum is happening in September. Just very quickly, if an SME wanted to join that forum, they just go through Cardin, or how?
Well, I'll work with Cardin, I'll work with the relevant industry bodies, and then we'll obviously get that information out to people so they can come along. But the most important thing we've got to do in the first instance is to really identify those sweet spots, the sectors where we've both got comparative advantages, where our respective strengths are going to complement one another. And the other thing that we're trying to do is map out, sort of, particularly in the SME sector where it's less well understood, who's doing what in Australia already, what can we build on that's already in place, but making sure that we're very clear with both large organisations and SMEs. Here are the sorts of projects, the sorts of ideas that we've got you might be interested in.
Okay. So we do have other topics that we want to talk about. One of them is cleaner energy, especially electric vehicles. Now, I know that Australia and Indonesia are already cooperating in regards to critical minerals needed for EV batteries, namely the MOU signed between Kadin and Western Australia in 2023. There are many Australian energy and mining companies in Indonesia already, BHP, Woodside Energy. What renewable energy collaborations or projects in Indonesia could we see from Australian companies, in Indonesia?
Well, there's lots of opportunities. Let's just go to electric vehicles as a starting point. So, as I said earlier, Australia has great lithium resources. We've got magnificent companies who are very, very efficient at mining it. And then there's a question as to whether or not there's an opportunity for joint ventures around refining and processing. So, and of course, Australia has given Indonesia tariff-free status to import electric vehicles into Australia. So that's a big win for Indonesia, and a big vote of confidence by our government in Indonesia that if you develop an EV sector, we will make it super easy for you to export those vehicles into Australia. So there's the whole critical minerals area. Okay. Then there's things like on the renewable energy front, what can we be doing in terms of research and development? Is there opportunities around hydrogen? Are there opportunities around carbon capture storage? We spoke yesterday with quite a few people around the opportunities around CCS in fertilisers, CCS in coal. There's a whole suite of things. Okay. And one of my jobs is to kind of focus on the things where we think, actually, that's the sweet spot where we've got people with capability, we've got existing relationships, and we can put a deal together. And of course, then there's the whole work you've got to do and we've got to do on reforming and changing our grids. The huge networks that have got to be developed to get an integrated renewable energy system working in with traditional baseline power. Yeah. That's a big job. Yeah. We're doing that now in Australia. There's a lot of opportunities there.
Okay. I think maybe the producer will get a bit angry with me. We're running out of time, but there's just one more question I want to ask about Indonesia's new capital city, Nusantara. What are the updates on that from the business side?
Very exciting. You don't get to build new cities very often. I'm very fortunate in Australia. I'm the chair of the authority building one next to our new airport. But look, infrastructure, buildings, green design, engineering, all those opportunities, but also starting to think about what are going to be the ancillary industries that you would put in the new capital, where again that opens up opportunities for investment.
So the interest is there from Australia?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Look, we're building a new city in Australia, but you don't get to do this very often. So when engineering companies, infrastructure companies hear about a new city, they get very excited. Okay,
that is very great news. We'll be looking forward to that, and also more updates, maybe from the forum as well, on how SMEs can further export to Australia. Professor Jennifer Westacott, business champion of Australia to Indonesia, thank you so much for coming to our city. We hope to have you again to give us more updates.
Look forward to it. You're very welcome. Thank you.
So much. All right, well, that's it for today's edition of See Today Business. Don't forget, you can always get the latest updates on all of our stories at seetoday.com for free. Make sure you follow us on our social media accounts. We're available on Instagram, x.com, and YouTube at See Today News. Make sure you check back tomorrow for the latest business news. For now, my name is Krishna Sam. I'm signing off with See Indonesia, See the World, See Today. Bye-bye.